right, we're going to go ahead and get started. This session is being recorded, so I'm going to run through this session the same as I would, if I had one person or 100 people in here. So that way anybody can come back, watch it, and understand what we're doing, what we're talking about here today. So let me welcome you to this Tech Talk. This is an introduction to Cisco Meeting Server. My name is Jason Ball, and I'll be your proctor during this session today. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself and who I am, and then we'll go ahead and get started into the content. So I have been doing technical training for it's been 12 years now, I think. I actually started with Tandberg, and then Tandberg got acquired by Cisco, and so I became a Cisco instructor as well, and got up to speed on all the Cisco certs and everything else. And I currently hold 22 certifications with Cisco. I've done a lot of work beyond just training. I've done installations, I've done consulting. I've also authored 2 books. My most recent book is the CCNP and CCIE Collaboration Core, CLCOR 350-801 Cisco Press book. That is a prep book for this exam. And so this was my most recent book that just came out. I'm also working on another book for the CLCEI certification dealing with Cisco Edge technology. So that's Expressway Core, Expressway Edge, and all of the WebEx products. So I'm working on that book right now. Hopefully that book will come out. We're shooting for this summer, so we'll see what happens. But you know how that goes. Okay, so let's go ahead and just a little bit about me. Let's go ahead and jump into this course content here. There we go. So basically, I want to cover 2 main topics as I go through this Tech Talk today. I want to talk about what CMS is, and that's just for anyone who just may not be familiar with Cisco Meeting Server. And then we're going to talk about what's new in CMS. So even if you are already old hat with Cisco Meeting Server, you're very familiar with, you've been working with it for a while, I think it's good to know what has changed in Cisco Meeting Server, because just in the course of this last year, Cisco has implemented many different changes in Cisco Meeting Server, because they're really starting to take this product in the new direction. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through this today as well. So as we look at what Cisco Meeting Server is, we're going to talk about what Cisco's meeting strategy is with the different meeting products that they have available today, what their on-premise strategy and vision is. We're going to look at some of the different deployment models available with Cisco Meeting Server and services that run on the back end of Cisco Meeting Server really make it the robust product that it is. And then we're going to look at what's new. So we'll talk about some of the customization changes in CMS, the meeting management services available, smart licensing, web application, installation assistant, Ldap provisioning from CMM, and API configuration tool. So let's begin by examining exactly what CMS is. So for some time, Cisco's messaging has been cloud first, not cloud only. You may have heard them say that in different webinars that they've offered, or if you've gone to Cisco Live or any of the other big events. Anytime they talk about collaboration, their big message is it's always cloud first, not cloud only. And a lot of people have asked me through the years, what does that even mean? Does that mean Cisco's abandoning on-premise or just moving to cloud? Like, what does it mean? It doesn't mean any of that. Now, Cisco has put a lot of emphasis on their cloud solutions lately. That's where most of their development has been, because they see a change in the market and they're trying to meet that need. A lot of people are moving to the cloud, and Cisco is well positioned to offer those cloud-based services. However, it does not mean that they're abandoning their on-premise solutions by shifting over to the cloud. So it's cloud first, but it's not cloud only. Cisco still has a commitment to develop and offer the best on-premise products available, including their conferencing products. Now, Cisco has a lot of conferencing products available. They have WebEx Meetings, which is kind of their pinnacle cloud-based product. They have Teams, WebEx Teams, which you can also do meetings with, and you can even join into WebEx Meetings from WebEx Teams. And so there's a lot going on there. And perhaps I'll do a tech talk on all of that in the future. But where we're focusing on today is Cisco's premium on-premise conferencing solution, which is the Cisco Meeting Server. Sorry, my mouse got clicked off here. All right. So Cisco is committed to the on-premise customer, and CMS is Cisco's lead on-premise meeting solution. Cisco brings premise-based video, audio, and web communication together in this single product in order to meet the collaboration needs of the modern workplace. CMS works with third-party devices and provides an enjoyable and intuitive user experience. It scales really easy and can be purchased using Cisco's all-in-one user-based multi-party licensing offer. Cisco Meeting Server offers several deployment options and capabilities. It can be deployed using 3 different on-premise deployment platforms. You have the CMS 2000 server, which is a bare metal installation of CMS on a Cisco UCS server. When I say bare metal installation, I just mean it's not a virtual machine. It's installed on there just like your operating system is installed on your computer, right? It's embedded into the system itself. When that system boots up, it is Cisco Meeting Server that comes up as the operating system. There's also 2 virtual installations that can be supported for Cisco Meeting Server. You could also purchase the CMS 1000 appliance server, which is also a UCS server, but it doesn't have that bare metal installation. It has an instance of VMware ESXi installed on the server, and then CMS is installed on VMware for you as a virtual machine, right? So you can do the bare metal installation of CMS on the server, which is the CMS 2000 server, or you can do the CMS 1000 server, which has VMware ESXi and CMS pre-installed for you. The third option for deploying CMS is you purchase your own server, whatever brand server you want, as long as it supports VMware ESXi and meets the hardware specifications for Cisco Meeting Server. And then you install your own instance of the virtual software on that server to run CMS. And I have done this type of installation on many different types of servers. I've done it on Dell. I've done it on HP servers. I've done the CMS 1000 on the Cisco UCS servers. I've taken bare metal UCS servers, stripped them down, reloaded ESXi on them, and then loaded CMS on it. So I've done all of these. They all work really well. And there's a lot of consistency between the different applications. And so CMS also supports a consistent one meeting experience. And it does this by preserving that end user experience no matter what device is used to connect to the meeting. It offers interoperability with WebRTC, which if you don't know what WebRTC is a protocol that was originally created by Google, and then it was later developed as a joint effort between Google and Mozilla Firefox. And they offer it as an open source protocol, and it basically allows you to use a web browser as a soft client to be able to join in a meeting. So using something like Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox or even Apple Safari or Internet Explorer, you can actually join into a meeting and have two-way audio, two-way video, and two-way content sharing, all right there just from a web browser without installing anything else on that device, which means you can also join meetings not only from Microsoft or Apple computer, but you can join from any brand of smartphone, tablet, anything that'll run a browser, has a camera, microphone, speakers. You can use that to join into these meetings, which is really cool. And WebRTC was one of the big hooks with CMS back in its entry days when it first entered the market, actually as a Kano back then. And it's still a huge aspect to what draws people to Cisco Meeting Server today. And Cisco Meeting Server also offers high scalability. And I think this one's really key because prior to Cisco Meeting Server, on-premise conferencing solutions were very limited in their capacities because they required so much processing power that it was hard to build a machine big enough that you would be able to scale even to offer conference meetings at a grander scale with higher participant capacity and so forth. With Cisco Meeting Server, they've built it in such a way that it is the most scalable solution available on the market today for an on-premise conferencing solution. You can have conference meetings in a cluster of CMSs that have literally hundreds of participants in them. And that's unheard of in this industry with a solution like this. Now, as of Cisco Meeting Server version 3.0 or later, current version of CMS is 3.1. 3.2 should be out within the next month or so, if everything goes according to plan and COVID hasn't gotten in the way. But as of CMS version 3.0 and later, there are two different deployment models for CMS. And the first of these is a single combined server deployment, which uses a single Cisco Meeting Server with all the necessary services running on that one server. Nice thing about this deployment is it's a simple solution to deploy, simple solution to manage. Unfortunately, though, there's no resiliency or scalability in this type of server deployment, right? So if your CMS goes down, sorry about your luck. You can't do meetings, right? And that's why the alternative solution is a scaled and resilient deployment model. And so this solution, this can be applied to a group of CMS servers of 3 or more. Cisco does recommend, if you're setting up a scaled and resilient deployment model, that you have a minimum of 3 CMSs. Now, can you set this up with 2? Technically, yes, you can. But if one of those 2 fails, you don't have a scalable and resilient deployment anymore, right? You have a single combined. And that's the idea here is if you have 3 or more servers clustered together, then if one of them dies, you still have a cluster. You still have resiliency, right? You still have that reach that the scaled and resilient deployment offers. Common core components can be configured on multiple servers or on separate servers. So for example, you may have the call bridge service configured on all 3 of these servers that you see on this slide, right? But recording service, you may only have it configured on one, or maybe CMS1 and CMS2 has the call bridge service, but CMS3 has the recording service. So that way you're not overtaxing resources on any one server. So they can be distributed across all peers within the cluster, but it doesn't have to be. The way scalability and redundancy can be achieved is through clustering key CMS services. So when we're talking about a scaled and resilient server deployment model, we don't call it a cluster for a reason, because you're not actually clustering the servers themselves. Rather, what you're doing is clustering services within each of those servers. And there are specific services that you're able to cluster and other services that you can't. When clustering, Cisco does recommend using, again, an odd number of databases. And so they would say use 3 or 5, right? Don't use 4. You can use 4. It's okay to use 4. It's just not what Cisco recommends. And it has to do with how all these services on the back end are communicating with each other and what happens if one of them fails and that sort of thing. So they say for best results, use an odd number of services. But what you should definitely take away from this is you should not build a scaled and resilient server deployment with less than 3 CMSs, right? You should have at least 3 CMSs running in this cluster. Now, as of CMS version 3.0 and later, there are 4 different services that can be activated on a Cisco Meeting Server. The first and probably most predominant service of all of them that are available is the call bridge service. And this service is used to manage all call loads on the Cisco Meeting Server. Now, ideally, all the media for calls to a conference should reside on the same call bridge, right? If users are in the same location and if the required call capacity exists. When users are in multiple locations, then ideally you want to use one call bridge per location. So when you're creating a call bridge group within CMS, the call bridges that are configured as a cluster will result in intelligent load balancing of calls across all of the call bridges in that cluster. For the load balancing feature to work correctly, though, you need a round trip time of less than 100 milliseconds between any server that's running a call bridge within that call bridge group. So let's go back to this previous slide for a minute and just talk about this. In fact, I think I have a laser pointer here. It's not working very good. So let me try this another way. I will use the laser pointer from PowerPoint. There we go, that's better. All right, so in other words, I might have a cluster between these 3 CMSs. And what I have down here on CMS3 is I have a database service running, and that's it. And then on these other 2 servers, I have the database server running also, but I also have call bridge service running. Now, the round trip time between CMS1 and CMS2, because these are the 2 that have the call bridge, and so I'm gonna put those 2 call bridges in a call bridge group together so I can get that load balancing. So the round trip time between these 2 servers needs to be less than 100 milliseconds. But the round trip time between CMS1 and CMS3 doesn't have to be less than 100 milliseconds because I'm not running call bridge service on CMS3. So I could still keep CMS3 as part of the cluster and have a round trip time of up to 300 milliseconds between CMS3 and CMS1. Okay, same thing with CMS2 and CMS3. I have a 300 millisecond round trip time between these 2 servers. But because call bridge service is running on CMS1 and CMS2, I need to keep that round trip time less than 100 milliseconds. All right. Okay. Now, if you plan to use the web app, then, and we'll talk more about exactly what the web app is. I've mentioned it a little bit. It has to do with WebRTC. We'll talk more about that in a future slide here, but here we're just talking about services. So if you're planning to use the web app, then you have to enable and configure the WebBridge 3 service. Web app uses the WebRTC protocol to allow video and audio calls through a web browser. And so using the web app does not require an activation key, but it does require the call bridge here to be enabled also. So you have to enable not just WebBridge 3, but also the call bridge, because again, call bridge service handles all call loads, even if it's point-to-point from web app to an endpoint or between two web app users. The Cisco Meeting Server also includes a recording facility and a streaming facility. Now, this component does require a separate license key be installed in order to activate it. And you should only enable the recording streaming server service on the same server as the call bridge if you're just evaluating the feature, right? You're just testing it out, see if it's something you want to use. It's not it's not like it's a service you're going to use on a regular basis. Then, okay, on the same CMS bridge, you can enable recorder and call bridge service, right? But in a production environment, Cisco does recommend that call bridge service and recorder service, recording streaming service, be enabled on different call bridges. And that was why, let me back up again here. I recommended that if I was running call bridge on CMS 1 and CMS 2, that I'd probably want to put recorder service on CMS 3, right? Because they're all, call bridge services is handling all of your call loads. So they're very resource intensive. Recorder service is recording all that information, so it's very resource intensive. And so I don't want both of these resource intensive services running on the same server. Now, in some situations, it can't be avoided. Maybe you're running a single combined server deployment, kind of like what you see here. And so I only have one CMS, but I want to use call bridge service and recorder service. What do I do then? In that instance, okay, you may have to enable both of them on the same server. However, if that is the case, if you're enabling the recorder service and call bridge service on the same server, make sure you size that server to handle the resource capacities of both of those services running simultaneously. All right. So in other words, you need to buy a bigger server. Which is always fun. So, all right, the last service, the fourth service that you can run on CMS is called the database service. Now, all information on a Cisco Meeting Server is stored in a database, but this is not the same component as the database service. The database service is a service used in a scaled and resilient server deployment so that data can be replicated between peers within a cluster. This service only needs to be activated and configured when you're clustering CMSs, but it's not needed for a single combined server deployment, because again, it's not the same thing as the actual database. It's just the service that allows data within the database to be replicated. It's actually the start of setting up a scaled and resilient server deployment. First thing you do is you activate your database services. It's the first thing you'll do. So, all right. Now, prior to version 3.0, there were many other services that existed within CMS, as you can see from the list in red on this slide here. Cisco's really focused on streamlining the CMS server through the last several revisions that it's made to that core software. All of these services that were removed can still be leveraged in a CMS solution through the Expressway Core and Edge. That's why Cisco removed them from CMS, because you don't need CMS to perform these functions, right? Load balancer, turn services, H53 gateway services, SIP Edge services, these are all services performed by the Expressway Core and Edge. So there's no reason to have these services anymore. Webrtc 2 was replaced by Webrtc 3, so there's no reason to have that service anymore. And Webrtc 3 is not dependent on XMPP anymore, so XMPP service went away as well, right? So there's just no reason to run any of these services anymore. What we're left with, now that Cisco has kind of streamlined these services down, is if you're running CMS version 3.x, you have a more powerful purpose-built on-premise conferencing solution with high scalability and powerful delivery of the highest quality meetings in the market. So now that I've introduced what CMS is and kind of the backbones of what makes CMS work, let's take a look at what's new in the CMS solution. And so starting with version 2.8, Cisco really went through and started like improving the features and functions of CMS. And this continued throughout 2.8 and 2.9. And then when they came out with 3.0, that's when they took away those services I just talked about, right? So 3.0 wasn't about adding something new, it was about taking away the old stuff you don't need anymore. And now we're left with this really great product with 3.0 and later that has all these new services. But these services, these not services, but these features were added starting with version 2.8. And by the way, 2.8 came out in April last year. 3.0 came out early September, it was end of August or early September last year. Can't remember which. So we went for April, May, June, July, August, 5 months. Cisco did basically a huge overhaul on CMS. And that's what we're talking about here, right? So starting at version 2.8, the meeting server introduces customizable layouts. And this is a licensable feature. You have to have the customization license key in order to do this, but it allows administrators more flexibility to create and apply custom layouts that suit their specific needs. Now, this goes back to a designed feature that was in an old Cisco product you may not remember, called the Telepresence MCU, which prior to that was called the Codian MCU. Now I'm really going back. And the original Codian designers that created that product, they were visionaries. And one of the things they really wanted to offer their customers was a lot of different layout options. So when they're joining a meeting, you can do all sorts of things with your layout. And by time the Telepresence MCU was end of sale, it supported 56 different layout options. And that was probably the predominant aspect to that server that customers loved. When Cisco bought the Cisco Meeting Server and then announced that they were getting rid of the Telepresence MCU, one of the big questions among the customers was, when are you going to add all these layouts to the Telepresence server? Well, anybody who's done any kind of programming, you know that's not a switch you can just flick on. I mean, that has to be built into the system, and it takes time to be able to debug it and make sure everything's working right before you release it to the public. And Cisco has added several new layouts to the meeting server. But what they did in version 2.8 is they said, instead of us adding all these new layouts in there, let's just let people create whatever they wanted. So what they did is they built functionality through the API into the customization, capabilities of CMS for customers to be able to go in and create their own layouts. And this is just one of the coolest things that I've seen. Now, again, you do have to have the customization license key, but Cisco made a key change with that customization license key as well. And that is prior to version 2.8, if you bought customization license key, you had to buy a certain number of licenses based on the customizations you wanted to introduce. Types of customizations you could do is you could change the on the WebRTC client, you could change the background image, you could change logos. If people called into an IVR, you could change the logo and background image of an IVR. You could do customized email templates to send out meeting invites and that sort of thing. And so basically, with one customization license, you could change the layout to one background, right? You couldn't create multiple backgrounds for different reasons or for different users. It was just one background, that's it. Everybody uses the same thing. What they changed with version 2.8 with customization is they took away that limit of the number of changes you can implement. So now you can put in as many changes as you want when it comes to customization. I can create a different background for every user within my organization if I want to. I can create multiple email templates for meeting invites. I can create multiple logos and install them on various meetings when people join in. And so now you can do a lot more customization. And the reason they made that change is so you can also go in and create multiple custom layouts that you can then use during those meetings. And beyond that, I mean, you can go even farther. You can take those customized layouts and say, I want to use this customized layout as the default layout for this specific meeting anytime someone joins in it. And I'm going to create a different customized layout, and I'm going to use it over here as the default layout for this other meeting if anybody joins into that one. So there's a lot of different stuff you can do here. Customization is really cool. Now, it's not completely intuitive. You do know how to have to know how to use the API. It would help to know a little bit of programming like JavaScript or something like that. But Cisco wants to make this easy for people. And so what they've done is they've actually created some training videos that are free for anybody to use, and they're available on Cisco's website. Just go on there and search for CMS customization video or something like that, training or something like that, and you'll be able to find these videos, and it actually walks you through step by step how to set up these customizations. Again, you can't do the customized layouts without the license key, but you only need to buy the license key once, and you get unlimited numbers of customizations that you can implement. Oops, there we go. Now, the one of the other big changes that really needed to happen in CMM relates to Ldap configurations. I think I didn't skip a slide, did I? No, okay, there we go. This relates to Ldap integrations. And prior to CMS version 2.9, this is where Ldap integrations really started to change. Prior to version 2.9, if I wanted to do an Ldap integration, I had to go in through the API and do my Ldap integration, my Ldap mapping and everything from the API. And that was very difficult, especially if I wasn't familiar with the API. Then it got even harder. And then not only that, when you started getting into Ldap integrations using a cluster of CMSs, I had to go in, I had to have a different API open for each peer in the cluster. I had to go in and pull down code information and embed it in the other ones. And it was just this really long, difficult process to set up that LDAP integration that a lot of people just skipped it and said, I'm not going to do this. Is too hard. It was really hard. Like, I am familiar with the API. I have used it a lot. I've done a little bit of programming, and you know what? I was still having a hard time with it. It is difficult to set up. And so I feel like this was an area that honestly, this change couldn't have come sooner. I mean, this should have been something right out of the gate that Cisco had changed about CMS. This was, of how great CMS is, this was the one thorn that just made me hate using it if I ever had to set up an LDAP integration, just because it was so difficult. And if you made any mistakes at all, you had to go through and troubleshoot it. And there was no real troubleshooting tools to figure out what went wrong. And so it was really hard to troubleshoot. And then when you find the change, just to be able to correct the change, it was just as hard as configuring the thing in the first place. And so it's almost better just to default the systems back to the factory default and start all over than try to troubleshoot and correct the issues when you have LDAP issues. So real problem with Cisco Meeting Server. But with the Cisco Meeting Management Server, or what we call CMM, this tool is used to manage different aspects of a CMS solution and offer many more services to this already robust solution. So again, prior to CMS version 2.9, LDAP mapping for importing users was configured via the CMS API. But starting with version 2.9 and later, you can now use CMM to enter all your LDAP server details, and it will configure the LDAP mappings for you on those meeting servers. LDAP users are added via mappings to existing groups on your LDAP server, and meeting management uses your LDAP server to authenticate these users by checking their group membership when they sign in. Cisco does recommend that you have at least one local administrator account set up in CMM, and this is just to make sure you still have access to the menus in meeting management in the event you lose connectivity to LDAP. However, Cisco does recommend that all active users are authenticated via LDAP, and that's just for security reasons. Really cool feature Cisco introduced to CMS and CMM, starting with version 2.6 and later, is the ability to allow SIP endpoints to be moved from one meeting to another by an administrator of that meeting. And this is useful for active meetings where you need to move one or more participant to a different meeting that's also active. So this could be, let's say somebody dialed into the wrong meeting. A manager of CMM could then just move that participant to the correct meeting instead of having them disconnect and then call back into the meeting. Or let's say you have a manager or someone within your company that it's meeting day, right? They just have meetings stacked up all day, back on back, one right after the other. Instead of that user disconnecting their endpoint, hanging up from a meeting, then having to call back into the next meeting and repeat that for every meeting they're joining, they could just go into CMM and just move themselves in between all the meetings, and they very quickly and easily jump from one meeting to the next, and so on. Another cool use for the move participant feature could be something like we're in right now, right? Maybe you're doing a class or something like that, and I could use one meeting for my general sessions where everybody can hear what I'm saying. And then if I wanted to break you out into breakout sessions, I could move you to those separate meetings, and you could join in your smaller groups and have those conversations you need to have, or work on labs or whatever you're doing in that breakout session. Any participant can be moved between any type of call with a few exceptions. You can't move participants between dual-homed conferences, meaning if you have a multi-domain environment that you're working in, you can set up what's called dual-homed for those different environments. However, you can't move participants between meetings in that case, right? You can't jump from one domain environment to another one. So if it's a dual homed environment, no moving participants. If you're using the meeting app users, can't move participants then either. Cisco Meeting app does not support the move feature. Other third-party clients don't support it either. So let's say you're using, or you have participants joining using Microsoft Teams clients, cannot use the move feature for those clients either. So in some ways it seems very limited, but pretty much cross-vendor, as long as it's SIP-based, there's at the very least the ability to move those participants. Now, when you're moving a participant between conferences on different call bridges, it does require each trunk that's between the CUCM and the call bridge to be configured to use a SIP trunk security profile that has the accept replaces header checkbox selected. And this is required even if load balancing is not configured between the deployments. What that means for environments that have SIP participants joining in CMS that aren't calling through CMS or through CUCM, those participants can't be moved either. So I say most SIP participants should be able to be moved. There is an exception even to that one. Let's say somebody outside your organization is calling in through your expressways, right? So they call the expressway edge, which forwards the call to expressway core, which forwards the call directly to CMS. It's not going through the CUCM. It's going straight from the expressway core to CMS. Those participants cannot be moved because the expressways do not support accept replace header and therefore won't support moving participants, right? Now, easy workaround, instead of having the expressway core forward those participants straight to CMS, you can have them forward them to CUCM and then down to CMS, and then you could move those participants. But just something you want to keep in mind when you're designing your solution. Now, during an active meeting, you can also change a display name or label for any connected participant. The display name you enter will be seen by all participants in the meeting for as long as participants are connected to CMS. And I specified to CMS because it's not necessarily connected to the same meeting, right? Because we just talked about moving participants. If I had a participant call into a meeting and someone changed their label and then moved that participant to another meeting, that label moves with them. They're still connected to CMS. And therefore, that label will actually move with them to the new meeting. Now, if that participant were to drop from CMS, let's say they dropped from one meeting and then called into another one, okay, label doesn't move with them then. They're going to assume the previous label they had prior to joining the meeting the first time. Or maybe they just have bad network connection and they got disconnected. They called back in immediately. It doesn't matter. Once that connection's severed, they lose that changed label, right? And you'd have to then go in and change it again. It does require CMS version 2.8 or later to be able to do the label change feature. And when you're changing labels, you can use up to 50 different characters in the new label that you created. Don't know why you would need 50 characters. I guess they're just trying to create a high threshold here so that people don't feel like they have to abbreviate or anything with a name. But lots of characters you can use. And so you could use this to change a name to pretty much anything. Now, why would you change someone's label, right? I mean, if John calls in the meeting, John's name's John no matter what, right? Why would I change it to something else? Well, consider how people might be joining. Perhaps someone joined in from a conference room endpoint, and the name that's associated when they call in is the name that was assigned to that conference room. So they're not conference room A, they're John, right? So you might want to change it from conference room A to John so that as John is talking to other participants and his label comes up above his name, people know who it is that they're addressing, right? Or that's addressing them. All right, with CMS version 2.7 or later, when you're in an active meeting, an administrator can place SIP-connected participants in specific panes, so they're always seen in that specific location of the screen, even if they're not speaking. This is similar to something called importance, when you make a participant important. Pane placement is useful if there's people in a meeting who want to be visible at all times. So this could be a host of a meeting, or maybe a CEO, or an invited speaker or guest. For the participants who are placed in those panes, you can decide whether they should see themselves in the reserved pane, or if they'd rather maybe just see a blank pane, or maybe even the next participant. Pane placement can only be set after the meeting has started, and only active participants can be assigned to panes. The screen layout assigned will determine the panes displayed, and the pane position in the layout determines the order that's being filled by the video participants. If a place participant were to disconnect from the meeting, just like with the labels, right, then the pane that they were assigned to becomes just a blank pane. And if that participant were then to reconnect to the meeting, you would have to add them to that pane again. They don't automatically assume that same position. So the figure on this slide shows the pane position of an endpoint with the screen layout set to all equal 9. And this is a fixed layout. So if there are more than 9 participants, the layout will not change in order to display more participants. The number indicated in the pane position or in the pane is the pane position. And it's like the order that's being filled. It's not an importance value is what I'm trying to say here. So when I say I'm assigning someone to pane number 1, that's just it's the first pane. So that's where I'm going to put them. Put the next person in pane 2, the next one in pane 3, and so on. It doesn't have to do with who's more important or less important. Meeting management can access TMS phone books, so video operators can use them to look up contacts when they add participants to a meeting. This is a really cool feature and very, very useful. I've talked to a lot of people who've requested this specifically, and I've had to go in and help. I had one person I was talking to, and they didn't even have TMS. And so I was like, well, you need to get TMS because this is what you're looking for. And they did. They went out and got TMS just so they could do phone books in CMM like this. So it's pretty cool. Basically what happens is when I want to add a participant, I come up here and I select move participant, and then I can just start typing a participant's name in. And if I have phone books integrated, then I get a list of names with dialable aliases. I just select who I want to add to the meeting and click add. And I can add up to, notice right here, it says 10 participants at a time. So I can select 10 different participants and then click add, and it'll add all 10 of those in at the same time. If you didn't have phone books integrated, then in order to use add participant right here, the arrows needs to be extended a little bit more. In order to use add participant, I would have to actually put in the user's alias. I wouldn't be able to put in just a name. There's no way to do a directory in CMM without integrating it with phone books in TMS. So to let your video operators use TMS phone books, you have to first add meeting management as a phone book client in TMS. You then assign phone books to your meeting management in TMS, and then come back to CMM and just check a box which enables the use of TMS phone books within meeting management. So 3 easy steps, not too difficult to set up, and huge value out of setting this up in your environment. Now, as of CMS version 3.0 and later, the meeting management is required to run in tandem with your Cisco Meeting Server. So you have to run both of them at the same time. All licensing is managed by CMM, and licensing is disabled by default, as you can see in the image on this slide. The licensing menu on CMM only allows you to monitor license consumption. In order to enable licensing from CMM, you have to use the settings menu. So you just select settings from the menu on the left column, then select licensing from the submenu, then click the change button. And in the middle of that page, you'll see a pop-up window that allows you to choose the licensing mode that you want to use. The traditional licensing method still requires the use of pack tokens that have to be manually uploaded into the Cisco License Manager manually in order to fulfill those packs and generate your licenses. Then you have to pull those licenses down, upload them in your CMS server, and then they're there available to use. And this creates limitations in any future changes that you may want to make related to your licensing consumption, such as adding more licenses or adding more servers in a scalable and resilient deployment, because then you have to open up a case with Cisco TAC and get someone from the licensing department to come in and help you make those changes. The alternative option is to choose smart licensing, which allows administrators to be able to manage and monitor their license consumption on a more granular level. Now, this is where things can get a little bit confusing because if a customer upgrades their CMS and CMM solution from a version previous to 3.0, then what they'll have is the choices you see on this slide here. They can choose either smart licensing or traditional licensing. But if a customer were to install a new instance of CMS beginning with version 3.0 or later, they'll only have the smart licensing option available to them. Now, if you were to select the radio button beside the traditional licensing and click save, then there's nothing else you have to do on CMM. These licenses are ready to use, assuming you've already gone through the process on the back end to get those licenses loaded into CMS. Then, if you go back to the licensing menu, with traditional licensing selected, you'll see a summary of all the licenses you have available. So you've got your SMPs, your PMPs, your recording, streaming, your customization, all right here. You can't change any of this data, but you can view it and see what you have available. If you scroll down on this page too, there's even a section, a little graphical representation of how you're actually consuming those licenses, like how often you're using licenses and what's the max number of licenses you're using and that sort of thing. Alternatively, you could choose smart licensing, but before you do smart licensing, you want to make sure you're signed up for a free smart licensing account. This is easy to do. You go to Cisco's website and you sign up there. It's free. It doesn't cost anything to do it. It only takes 1 to 2 minutes to sign up. But you cannot do anything with licensing, smart licensing on CMM unless you have a smart licensing account. So once you have that smart licensing account, again, we go to settings, choose choose licensing, and then choose that change button that you saw before, and that brings up this pop-up window again. Excuse me. And then you want to choose smart licensing and click save. That will expand all these other menu options on that same page, at which time you want to come down here where it says transport settings and click edit. That'll bring up a new pop-up window, which I don't have a screenshot for you, but it'll prompt you to log in to your smart licensing account. And so you put in your Cisco CCO ID, password, you log in, and there'll be a button to generate a token. So you generate the token, and then you copy that token, and that's all you have to do. You can close that pop-up window, which brings you back to this page you see right here in CMM. Then you want to click on this register button, and that will, oops, Here we go. When you click on that register button, that will bring a pop-up window that looks like this. You want to paste that token in this square and then click register. What that does by pasting that token in CMM is it establishes a secure line of communication between CMM and your SSM, which is your Smart Software Management Portal. And it establishes that secure connection so that license information can be shared between these two applications, right? Then when you go back to that licensing menu, instead of it just being an overview of the licenses, you now have granular control of how you want to use those licenses. And so if I have a single combined server deployment, I'll just put all the licenses on one server. Makes sense, right? But maybe later I decide I want to move to a scale and resilient server deployment. I don't have to go and open a case with TAC and try to get licenses changed and all that. I can just make those changes right here. I can say I don't want these licenses used on a single server. I want them used on all of these servers that are clustered together. And within your environment, you might have 2 or 3 different clusters that you're managing. And you can control those licenses on how they're used within each of those clusters, all from right here in this one place on CMM. Granular control, that's what it gives you. And the best part is this information isn't even shared back to the SSM. Cisco's website has no visibility onto how you're consuming your licenses. All they know is how many licenses you have. But this information is private and it's kept only on your CMM. All right, we are running a little short on time, so I'm going to try to move through these next few slides quickly. This slide's talking about the new Cisco Meeting app. It came available in CMS version 2.9. And this is the replacement app for the WebRTC and the Cisco Meeting app. WebRTC and CMA were dependent on XMPP, and you had to run a service called WebBridge 2. Cisco came out with WebBridge 3, which does not have any dependency on XMPP and will run the new web app. One of the benefits to the new web app is that it still has, or it now has a wider range of browser support, plus it has a lot of enhanced feature support as well. So with the old WebRTC and CMA, you could only use that with Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox, right? But now if you're running the new web app, it also has support for Apple Safari, for Internet Explorer, and for Microsoft Edge. And you could probably try it on some other web browsers as well. It may or may not work. We say support, it means that if you have issues, you can call Cisco TAC and they'll help you with these issues. They will support it, right? The web app's user interface has been used to enhance the experience of video conferencing with your team and to simplify the process of finding spaces. So now you can easily find your spaces in order to start a meeting or join a meeting that you were invited to. You can invite guests to join a meeting by simply copying the meeting details and optionally restrict access to a meeting by implementing passcodes, all from the browser interface when you log into web app. There's also a new, if you're installing a new version of CMS and you're just doing a basic single combined server deployment, Cisco introduced a new tool called the Installation Assistant. And again, this is used for the simple creation of a simple Cisco Meeting Server installation. This could be for demonstrations, for lab environment, or for a basic installation. The tool configures Meeting Server based on the best practices deployed or that are described in deploying a Cisco Meeting Server. It is a standalone tool that uses a browser interface to collect information about your setup and then pushes that information to the server without you needing to use all these different tools like an API, SFTP server, command line interface, anything like that, right? All you need is this one tool and it does everything else for you. Installation Assistant configures a meeting server to be a SIP MCU, capable of making and receiving calls, and optionally enables the web-based Cisco Meeting app that we just talked about. The app allows users to join meetings using just a browser, and this tool is built for configuring Meeting Server version 2.8 or later as a virtual machine only. You couldn't use it to do the CMS 2000 bare bones server. It's also not used with the legacy X series products. And so you could only use it with the newer models of CMS. And then CMS, this is the last one I want to cover with you. CMS recently introduced a new interactive API reference tool that's built right into the web GUI of CMS, enabling you to see a high-level view of the API objects and to be able to drill down to lower levels for details. There's also a series of learning labs Cisco came out with to help you get started using this API tool, and they're continually adding more to that over time. So the link you see on this slide, you could go to that link to find some of those learning labs. What's really great about this API tool, and I'm afraid, unfortunately, the screenshots I chose don't really show it, is that this tool was built for CMS. If you're using some other third-party API tool, like Postman, for example, to do API interactions with CMS, Postman wasn't built for CMS. So it works because they both support REST APIs, but it wasn't built for it. So it's kind of clunky, it's hard to use. You have to really know what you're doing. With this API tool, everything's right there. It's already embedded in CMS. So you're not you're not typing in manually all these API commands. You're selecting them from a list. And there's a quick search tool you can use in it to quickly and easily find what it is you're looking for to be able to interact with the API. And when you're putting commands in, you're not putting in JavaScript or Python or anything like that. Everything's in clear text. As you can see on the right side right here, it's when I go to configure something, it's just a menu option. I'm just filling out boxes or checking the boxes and enabling a feature. I don't have to type anything. I don't have to know coding. And so it makes using an API a little bit more intuitive. Now, when you look at this, it might look like, oh, wow, I don't even know what I'm looking at here. And that's true. There's still an element. There's always an element to API that's a little bit outside the box. It's not what we normally do. But if this is something that you're learning, this is a great way to learn it because it's much, much easier to use. And it's built specifically for CMS. I've played around with this a little bit and I absolutely love it. And I have used other API tools, and this is fantastic. And I think you'll enjoy it too. So that's what I wanted to share with you, introducing CMS. Let's see if we have any questions. Oh, someone said I've lived through the pain too. Yes, absolutely. CMM to the rescue, absolutely on that too. Are there any other questions anybody has? You can unmute your mic or you can put it in the chat window. Thank you guys for joining. I actually started 5 minutes late and ran 10 minutes over. So technically I was only 5 minutes over. But I want to thank everybody for joining me today. Sorry I took up a little bit extra your time, but hopefully you all learned something new, and I look forward to seeing you in future Tech Talks.